The Metaverse is emerging as the next big technology platform and promises to be the next frontier for human experiences on the internet. Into the Metaverse covers companies, technologies, and trends that are bringing these promises to life. Join creator and host Jonathan Raz-Fridman, founder and CEO of Super Social, as he interviews the brilliant minds that are building, shaping, and investing in the Metaverse.
Welcome to Into the Metaverse. I'm Yon, and joining me today is John Linden, CEO of Mythical Games, a company focused on building player-owned economies with game developers and publishers, in addition to their own portfolio of games such as Blankos. Prior to Mythical Games, John was president of Seismic Games, acquired by Niantic Labs. Among other things, developed Marvel Strike Force and Magic the Gathering, Valor's Reach. And prior to Seismic, John was studio head at Activision Blizzard, working on a little-known game called Call of Duty and the Skylander franchise, which until today, I actually think is one of the most exciting experiments done in the video game industry in the past 20 years. John, really excited to welcome you on the show finally.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Jan.
As always, everything we're talking about is not a financial advice. We're just focusing on really informing you guys and educating about this emerging space. So, John, jumping straight into the first question, I like asking every podcast guest that comes to the show. I've been fortunate to talk to so many brilliant minds that are operating in this space and really seeking to build some form of a consensus around this whole quote-unquote metaverse concept. So first and foremost, before we even start, I'm genuinely curious, how do you define at all the metaverse?
Oh, wow. You went deep right away, Jan.
Right away.
I hate to say it. It's actually still one of my least favorite terms in the industry right now, partly because there's not a great definition, right? People are like, oh, it's Roblox and Minecraft. Other people is like, oh, it's something we haven't seen before. Oh, it's Ready Player One, right? And I think for us, we view it as a 3D internet, right? And I think that's coming, right? I think when you can actually move from any 3D experience to another 3D experience very seamlessly, to me, that's the metaverse, right? That's when we start getting a new form of interaction that is completely seamless. So I really kind of play it out like the 2D internet formed, right? And I feel like a lot of gaming applications and 3D applications are more AOL right now. It's very locked. It's very, you're either in or you're out. And I think we're going to be moving into more of what the internet became, right? To where you can go from Amazon.com on one set of technologies just as easily as you want to go to Microsoft.com on a separate set of technologies. And I think that's what the metaverse to us is. It's truly a 3D internet.
I love the simplicity of that definition, and I think that resonates a lot as we think about also talking about, and we're going to talk a little bit about this in the show today, about what type of content and actual virtual experiences people can expect to have in said, quote, metaverse that they were not able to access today. I think another thing that a lot of people associate the metaverse, for lack of a better description, is, oh, it's just a video game becoming kind of a bigger thing around the internet, which I also think is a bit misleading and probably doesn't tap into the full potential of what happens when the internet is actually interoperable across 3D environments. I do want to ask as a follow-up question, how does technologies such as blockchain and AI, specifically generative AI, do you think are going to add or expand on the concept of a 3D internet?
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty critical. I think actually blockchain becomes pretty important for a lot of things. Maybe not in the fashion that people have been thinking about blockchain. I think blockchain kind of went a lot of different directions right away. There's some fundamental pieces of that technology, though, that is absolutely remarkable. And it's still very complicated, right? But the concepts that came out with decentralized finance and DeFi and things like that, there really are game changers. And I think for us, we think it's actually very pivotal to the metaverse. We think it's also very pivotal to AI, right? The idea that that a blockchain and immutable ledger can end up being kind of a point of record, a transparent point of record for all these new things that are coming out, we think is actually pretty critical. So I think a lot of people kind of, play out blockchain to Bored Apes, or they play out blockchain to, some DeFi scam or whatever. And I think we're missing the point that it's a fundamentally interesting tech that could really be used to solve a lot of the problems I think we're going to see as society coming up.
So Kathy Wood, who is the founder of ARK Invest, which is also an investor in Mythical Game, was on the podcast a few months ago. And one of the things we talked about is the concept that ARK Invest has talked about for a couple of years now, which is the notion of a user-owned internet. And so I'd love if you can unpack that for a second in terms of not only user-owned internet, but what is the role of blockchain in enabling an internet where people have a real skin in the game, no pun intended, and actually have a stake in some of the next major platforms that are going to be built and the content inside it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, I think, it's easy for, there's certain companies out there right now that have done incredibly well, and they're not going to be super incentivized to create this open ecosystem, right? I mean, you see it across everything, right? You see it across, cell phones, you see it across gaming platforms, but I think those are pretty, rare phenomenons, right? There's literally a handful of companies now that are controlling a lot of that content or a lot of that access. And I think the rest of the world, right? Unless you're one of these 4 or 5 companies, I think, kind of aspire to have this open architecture. And I think, I hate to say it, open usually wins long-term, right? Maybe not in the short term, but I think open actually wins in the long term. And again, I'll use that same kind of piece there. I mean, the internet is what it is because of open standards, right? We wouldn't have what we have today if it was 4 companies kind of fighting out their version of it. It really did become open. And what we saw is this impact globally that kind of took over, right? And I think that same thing will happen on what we think in Metaverse and all that. And I think blockchain is a great technology to do that. And I don't suggest there's only going to be one wallet to rule them all, right? But I do think the concept that things get much easier, right? Transferring money back and forth, transferring identity back and forth becomes much more mainstream and much easier to do. And users ultimately do have control over that. I think that's going to become really, really important.
One of the ways that I think is interesting to think about interoperability and why it's so natural to human behavior is think about when you buy in the physical world, if you buy Adidas shoes, when you go to Nike store with your Adidas shoes, no one stands in the Nike store and tells you, sorry, you're wearing Adidas, you can't come in. So it's almost like we are used to full interoperability across assets that we own. And it's so interesting that the internet, at least in its current formation, really had few companies that are coming in. What do you think needs to be true for that level of interoperability and collaboration to happen? As an example, just recently, I think I just saw that Apple announced the Open USD Alliance, right, to make universal scene description available, a key technology Pixar has built over the years. And then there is Metaverse Standards Forum, and God knows what other forms are going to come up in the next few years. What needs to be true for those major companies to collaborate, and how new entrants like Mythical are thinking about breaking through the clutter?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. These are some deep questions. I love it. So I think a couple things. So I'll unpack that a little bit. I think open standards have been pushed by big companies for a long time, and they push them in certain areas, and other areas they might not. I mean, right now Apple's kind of pushing formats. It's obviously very advantageous for them to get adoption of that format, and they've been a very big contributor, obviously through Pixar and Steve Jobs' relationship back in the day, right? So they're very close to that company. But I do think it's great to see that happening, and I think we're going to see more and more of that. I mean, I don't think that's going to slow down anytime soon. Yeah, I think NVIDIA is doing a ton of work around the space. Microsoft is definitely doing a lot of work, but I think interoperability is going to be key over time, right? And I think, again, same thing. Interoperability is another one of those words that I don't think we have a good definition of yet. A lot of people are, and the same thing with digital ownership. I mean, really, we are so much in the infancy of all these terms get cluttered very fast, right? A lot of people are like, well, I own, like digital ownership doesn't necessarily mean you own Spider-Man, right? And going back to your example, I think it's a great example. The example I've used a lot of times is like figurines, right? If I have a Spider-Man figurine and I own that figurine as a consumer, I can put it, dare say you, against a Batman right next to it, right? You can put DC and Marvel right next to it. I could dress it up if I want to, right? I have certain things I can do as a consumer. I don't own Spider-Man. I didn't buy Spider-Man and own the IP, right? But I own that object, and I own what I can do with that. And I think those are the types of things for digital ownership. Same thing with interoperability, right? Interoperability, I think, will become different things for different people. I don't think this whole idea of one item will suddenly work everywhere. But I do think it opens up business development, right? To where, I'll use the Bored Apes. I think apes are actually doing a good job of like, cool, you can have this ape, and then suddenly there could be different permutations. And that ownership record is what opens that up, right? But interoperability has a lot of challenges around, not necessarily around the ownership side. I mean, that part I think is kind of figured out. It's really around the production side, right? And the idea, it kind of cracked me up for a long time. People are like, oh, I can own this one NFT and it'll work in every single opportunity. I mean, that's not going to work, right? I mean, it's just every 3D experience has shaders, they have lighting, they have different rendering methods, right? They have different art styles, and there's never going to be one. It'll be the worst. It'll be like things that nightmares are made of if you suddenly have all art styles in every project, right? So, but I think we're setting a lot of those foundational pieces to where we can enable that, right? One set of assets can go into another opportunity. Two companies can partner. A charity can suddenly give out items, or items can be given out for charity. I mean, there's all types of new models that come out of that. And interoperability, digital ownership, and what we think ultimately becomes the metaverse really helps open those doors, right? And we've used this before. I mean, we think what Mythical is trying to do is really help open a new business development layer in 3D worlds, right? Whether it's a game or it's watching an entertainment experience, it's really kind of bringing this together, letting creators create, letting players have ownership of their items and their roles, and letting new forms of entertainment and interactions occur.
I think what you said is so fundamental, and I want to repeat it in a different way, which is why this is such a new frontier. And I think a lot of people, companies, brands, content creator are struggling with understanding all these notions of interoperabilities, because really it's going to truly change business models that we have been really used to for the past 20, 30, 50 years, let alone from IRL, but also on the internet. It's still very isolated. Just what you described. Imagine two IP owners interacting with one another in ways that were not available until today. I mean, everyone talks about Disney and what they've done with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all those meshing of characters. What people don't remember or maybe forget is, first of all, Marvel is owned by Disney. And second, all of these characters live inside the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's not like they had to go and collaborate with other companies and other corporations. And here, it will open up completely new possibilities of how even IP owners should think about business opportunities in a way that is becoming less and less linear.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the MCU, I mean, it wasn't just like they just randomly picked people and threw it together, right? That's been very carefully coordinated in the style and in how those worlds come together. But it is cool. It's a great parallel to it. It's like you start seeing some really cool new stuff, right? And that's, for Disney, as an example, that openness between all these different worlds has created so many different business opportunities for them and spinoffs and things like that. So it really, I mean, I love that parallel to it. But again, it wasn't just, they just like, cool, let's all just mash them up and hope it works, right? It's a very calculated piece. And I think, again, I think the same thing on the internet. I don't think there's just going to be a one day every asset works and you can just take what you want. It's really going to be this coordinated effort of saying, oh my God, Mattel has done a beautiful job recently, right? Of with the Barbie movie coming out, they've been integrated into so many different pieces, right? Imagine more of that happening, right? When something comes out, a company can be like, hey, we're going to go after 2,000 different outlets now and easily get our brand into 2,000 outlets, right? Mattel did a beautiful job with maybe 20 this time. I'm sure it took that team an extraordinary amount of work, but there are production issues and things like that. And that's where AI starts getting exciting as well in this whole space of interoperability. AI is going to be critical for production of assets, right? Particularly 3D.
So like many other people, I've known about Mythical now, I would say, for probably about 4 years. And I think for me personally, my first interaction with Mythical Games as a company was really getting a newsletter email about Blankos, which I was like, wait, so there's a game here, but they're talking about this new economy platform. So I think this is a great opportunity to maybe pause for a second. I really want to get your download on what is Mythical Games as a company today, and what are you really aiming to accomplish over the next 5 to 10 years as a company?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So I think Mythical, we're really focused on becoming the next generation of gaming, right? And what those gaming experiences is, kind of where that goes and what they become. For us, I'd say right now, we've been mostly focused around what we kind of call econ tech, right? So things like marketplace, chain, blockchain, things like that, to really enable, not just to build it, but to really enable new game models that come out of that. And that's been a primary focus. We do have kind of a second product we've been working at commercializing recently around streaming, right? Which we think is very interrelated. A company called Polystream that we acquired, and we've done some really fun work around that. We're getting very close to having our first client out. And I think what you're going to see from Mythical is a series of tech. There might even be a third one, in a year or two. But I think a couple core pillars that we think are very critical to redefining new game experiences. So that's first and foremost. I'd say we're a tech company really focused on some very fundamental tech plays that we think are going to really design the next decade or 2 decades of gaming experiences. On top of that, then Mythical, we've been predominantly a studio built on top of our tech stack. And the reason we did that is that it wasn't necessarily, we have goals to kind of roll that out to a full platform. I think if you roll platforms out too early, you end up with a bunch of frustrated developers, you end up with a lot of half-built solutions, and you frankly end up with a lot of products that don't end up scaling or being successful. So the reason we started with the studio model is that we could have our hands in it. So we started off with Blankos. That was we call it our champion of first, right? We learned a lot from that product. We're investing behind the IP. There's going to be kind of hopefully a new announcement fairly soon on a new kind of version of that. And again, it's all built on top of this tech. We will never kind of build off our tech stack. I think that's one thing we're committed to. But what we do want to do is take a lot of these tech stacks, and once we really show that playbook of, hey, here's some success criteria. And I think things like NFL Rivals is starting to show that in a pretty big way. I think in a couple of weeks, we have a big announcement coming to even take that further. And as we get that really polished, then we'll start opening it up to other people and be like, hey, and that's the whole idea, even behind why we started Mythos Foundation or tried to get that off the ground with all these other companies is like, hey, let's get talking now. Let's be building. Let's show success of how these models can be successful. And then let's open it up and let's let, everybody can kind of start playing off of that tech. So in a nutshell, that's what we're doing. So tech, studio game model, and ultimately kind of opening it up into a platform.
So super clear. Thank you for that. So here's a question that, I'm actually interested both for the episode that we're recording now, but also in my other hat as a studio and a publisher, right? Super Social, company I founded 3 years ago, it primarily initially focused on the Roblox platform to build these kind of next generation games and experiences on the greatest next generation platforms. Maybe anywhere in between the near term to the long term, what do you think the mythical platforms and tech stack you guys are building can enable, let's say early stage, small to mid size company like Super Social that is really aiming to build these next generation experiences?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think our goal is to basically get the tools into as many platforms as possible, right? So you guys, a lot of people have been building on Roblox and now Fortnite, the Fortnite engine and stuff like that for a couple reasons. One, predominantly, that's where the players are right now, right? You actually, anytime you have a game or any market or any tech, right? If you have buyers and sellers or users and content, if you can eliminate one of those, you're going to have a better odds of being more successful. So people kind of gravitate to those two right now because they have a built-in audience and you can now just focus on your success KPIs against that. We think over time though, it should really be everywhere, right? And I think I think Roblox and like I said, I definitely no disrespect to Roblox and Epic and those guys. We love them. We work, we're working quite a bit with both of them, and we have a lot of friends from, there's the head of marketplace and the head of product there is former colleagues from Activision, right? So we know that teams really well. They're just building a little differently. They're capitalizing on they are a phenomenon, right? And it's hard to build a phenomenon. You kind of become a phenomenon. And even then, Roblox took 14 years before it became what it was, right? Anybody that comes out and says, I'm going to build Roblox is like, yeah, you're not, you can build something similar to Roblox, but you're not necessarily going to catch that pop culture, that phenomenon that they've had. Same thing with Fortnite. So I think that's where people are at right now, but eventually they will wane, right? I mean, we've seen that. Like there's no game or no IP that eventually doesn't wane. I'd say even World of Warcraft, right? It's been around for a long time and it's rebooted for a long time. But it's still not what it was, right? And so I think any world like that will come and go. And what we're hoping is the next set of worlds are more compatible, right? They're more open. So the content creators, I very much believe in the creator economy. I think the creator economy will win. And I think it not only does great things for companies like Super Social, to where you guys are building awesome new experiences, but I think it can be as simple as a player has an idea and they can capitalize on that, right? It's the roll up of the gig economy. It's the indie studios. It's everything anybody can now create in these worlds they're playing in. And I think that's really important. And that's what we're hoping to provide. We're doing it with some of our own games right now. We saw it a little bit with Blankos. And again, it's building blocks, right? I don't think anybody that says, hey, we're going to do a 1.0 and get it all right, there's no way. But we're trying to kind of chip away at that so that companies like Super Social or even an individual player in South Africa can really create and value their contributions, right?
Well, this is great. And I really want to double click on that point, which is, I believe, really important. One of the things I had Rev Liberidian, who I'm sure is the head of the Omniverse at NVIDIA, great guy, incredible technologist. And we talked on the podcast and he said, Yon, you need to remember at the end of the day, if the metaverse is going to be realized, it's going to require everyone to be able to create content, people, teams, companies, individuals, corporations, AI, and so on and so forth. I want to ask you though, because you just said something fundamental, that even the player should be empowered to create. Why do you think that is so important, that anyone will be able to create content and deploy that content in whatever platform to enable these next generation experiences versus what we've seen until today, at least in 3D? And we can talk about YouTube and Instagram and TikTok as an analogy of how they've democratized creation of digital content in 2D. But why is that so important in 3D? And why is it so important that so many stakeholders are going to be able to create 3D experiences?
Well, I mean, I think, one thing we see, our view right now is the two most important things that have happened to gaming have been free to play. Free to play, we went from 100 million gamers roughly a month 20 years ago, 25 years ago, to now we're sitting at about 3.7 billion, 3.8 billion. That's been a huge, huge model, right? There's literally half the world's population are in game worlds now every month, which is crazy high number, right? The second one is UGC, and I think UGC to us, user-generated content to us, is everything from esports to influencers to companies building worlds in other worlds and other platforms to brands, musicians, artists, celebrities, and players themselves. And there's more content being produced than one studio or one platform could ever create on their own. And I think that's really, really important, right? To me, I think if you can suddenly now empower, and I'm not saying that everyone's going to get rich playing games, right? That's not the goal. The goal is that if I have a concept, no matter where I'm at or who I am, if I have a concept, I should be able to try and capitalize on that concept, right? And I think that gets exciting. It's now trading card, people that trade cards, or Beanie Babies back in the day, or really anything that they want to basically kind of be part of and have an idea. I think you should have the ability to take that digital idea and create something off of it over time, right? So I'm excited on where it goes. I think it'll actually open up a brand new gig economy for the world, right? To where, if you think about it, if you have half the world's population are in virtual worlds every single month, and suddenly there's a way for you to monetize that, I think you're going to get a lot more people that will create, and a lot more creativity, and frankly, a lot more wealth distribution over time, and I think that's an important thing for where we head as with digital economies.
I agree. And I think that another thing that I believe is interesting about Roblox that I want to call out, that I don't think people talk enough about, is actually not necessarily the ecosystem that they've built, but in a way, Roblox really educated and taught millions of people to actually learn to code, at least in their own programming language, which is Lua. And then what they've done, they taught these people that, you can build a game with that code. And now I think there is a recognition that, I can build a game and I can actually make money and potentially make a living. And I think this is really fundamental. And I think the ability to enable anyone to make a living is really going to proliferate to realms that I don't think we've seen before. Because also on these digital platforms today, and I want to talk about that a bit in a second, about the business model and the commercialization piece. Because when you do look at platforms like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, there is only real revenue stream for creators at the moment, which is advertising based and some selling some merch, right? And so on and so forth. I'm curious, from your vantage point, as the internet potentially becoming 3D, becoming more interoperable, becoming more open with new technologies, allowing creators of all sorts and all sizes to build stuff, how do you think that could potentially impact the way monetization or revenue creation could basically become available for different creators?
Yeah, so I think it's baby steps a little bit. For us, Blankos, the reason it was called Blankos is the idea originally was every character, you buy a blank silhouette and be able to create your own and resell that, right? And that's, if you think about it, that's how the physical collectible space really kind of took off, right? Companies like Kid Robot, they had these silhouettes, these dunnies, and all these different groups that the artists would literally take blank silhouettes and they create their own community around their art style. And it gave them an ability to create a community around these physical products. And I think it's kind of a similar type thing, right? If you can suddenly take away a lot of that, the difficult part, right? And you can literally let people just use their mind and create whatever they want and be able to kind of create a following and do that, I think is really exciting. Now, there's always a balance, right? Blankos, we really balance between full UGC or curated, curated collections. And we kind of went down the curated collection point. But what's cool is almost every single Blanko was created by a third-party artist. Like, we didn't create most of those, right? We even had companies like Burberry and Kellogg. Kellogg created their own Pop-Tart Blankos, and Toho Digital brought Godzilla Blankos in, right? And to me, what was really cool about that, one of my favorite stories around that is we had one of our first artists in Blankos, and he's an actual physical toy creator. That's what he does. He creates vinyl toys for a living. And I remember the first call when he had sold out his first design. And not only did he sell out, but he's starting to get secondary, fees off of every time it sold in a secondary market. And I remember the first time we were kind of going through. Now, Blankos originally, it wasn't, you weren't getting necessarily smart contracts and money would show up as it came in. We're starting to get more into that because a lot of the older brands, they didn't really care for that. They're like, yeah, just pay us quarterly, that type of thing. But it was still all tracked through the ledger. So they could go in and see every single sale and all that. But I remember the first time when we saw an artist, and I think it was definitely a 5-figure first check. And it was amazing watching his reaction. He's like, that's like 10 times more than I've ever made off of physical design, right? And since then, I think he put in another 3 or 4 Blankos, right? So it even takes artisans that gives them a new channel, and giving people a new channel of how to outlay their creativity, I think is super powerful. And I'd say, like I said, most of the early Blankos creators were all physical creators that we gave them a digital outlet, right? And I think that's exciting. And to me, that's still 1% of where I think we can go as a world. But I think, you can start, creating and have just that idea, right? And I love that. Some things we've been looking at. I love the concept of digital supply chain, right? Like I'm very hungry to make a game around this space. And it's something we've talked about off and on for a while. In fact, we prototyped a few things and it wasn't quite commercially ready. But the idea of digital supply chain, I think is phenomenal, right? I create a base object, right? It has 4 wheels and a chassis. Okay. Maybe I sell that to 99 cents. Anybody can buy my item and then they can add a spoiler. They can make their own design on top of mine. Right. And what this market becomes, we think becomes really, really interesting to where you can decide, hey, I'm going to go super rare and I'm going to have my audience. I'm going to go super rare, but I'm going to charge a huge markup because I think I can warrant that. Or I want to be a mass market producer, or, what I mean? There's all types of different things. And we did see some of this in Blankos, right? Like Burberry came out and they were wanting to launch a new fashion line. And it was very cool to get that call saying, hey, we want 2 spokespersons for our new fashion line, Naomi Campbell. And I'm like, makes sense. And we want a video game character in Blankos called Sharky B. And we're like, well, that's cool. Let's try that. Right. And what was cool about it is they came back and said, hey, we want to go ultra rare. We're going to do 750. We're going to price these at a few $100s for a digital only item. And I'm like, this is a terrible idea. And they're like, no, trust us. We know our brand. We know our business. And sure enough, it sold out in like 20 seconds. Right. So to me, we as game makers shouldn't be dictating how Burberry sells, right? We shouldn't be dictating how players eventually sell, right? Because people will be able to build their own communities and their micro communities around their IP, right? And I think that becomes really cool. So, are we there yet as Mythical? Not yet, but we're trying to put all those blocks down. And I'm hoping that everybody sees every game we put out, we're trying to push that a little further. And even our original games like Blankos, we're working on kind of some new pieces there of how to take that to the next level, right?
Well, I love that. And I will say on record that I do, we are working actually on something super interesting on Roblox that I think aligns with some of these elements, but off record, I want to talk to you about it because I do think there's a really interesting, I didn't think of it as digital supply chain, but that's definitely an interesting way to think about how do you really build certain collection and libraries of assets that really then are built by creators that then other could be brands, teams, individuals can build on top of, right? I want to switch gears and talk about
that's where blockchain becomes really, really important too, right? Is if you want to have a digital supply chain, I think it's very important in AI as well. I think blockchain can help solve a lot of attribution issues that AI is having already and will continue to have, right? To where if I put my IP out there and even AI grabs a part of it and that was used to create 0.01% of the inspiration, you could technically use blockchain and I would get paid for that 0.01, inspiration that my art had, right? Same thing with digital supply chain. I think that becomes really cool. And again, you make decisions, right? And there will be challenges and things like that. But, if Gucci comes in with their brand and their audience and says, hey, we're going to take this item and sure, we're going to pay everybody off down the chain, but we're going to take it and do 20x or 100x the price because of who they are. That should be fine, and everybody else gets paid off down the chain. I think that to me is so cool, and it opens up so many new opportunities and frankly new industries. I think sub industries that come out of this, right? People will become digital widget makers, and we've seen some of that, right? I mean, there's been some of that in 3D for a long time, but it's still pretty wholesale, let's call it. And if you can actually be kind of part of that value chain, I think it just changes everything over time. So,
and I think that is actually a really great example of why blockchain's ledger technology is interesting and compelling. When we talk about those fundamentals but again, why it's so new. And I think people are just literally wrapping their head around, wait, what are you talking about? Because the physical world doesn't operate like that per se, but because it's digital, it opens up basically no limits, no boundaries to what we can do. That is actually a great springboard to my next topic that I want to talk about for a few minutes, which is talking about your journey of building, designing, and launching, recently the Mythos Foundation, right? The DAO, the token. There's been a lot talked about DAOs, tokens, and God knows, like I do not want to go in that rabbit hole yet. But I do want to hear more and get your kind of double click on what is really the purpose of the Mythos Foundation and how do you want people to think about it?
Yeah, so yeah, we're so happy to kind of help get that off the ground, right? And at this point, Mythos it's not owned by Mythical. It has its own special counsel. It's run by a DAO, right? There's proposals coming in. There's games getting submitted now. So it really has kind of taken a life of its own, which is exactly what we wanted it to do. The way we want to kick that off, though, what's really interesting about it is we didn't want to be like, hey, we want a universal game token, like that wasn't the goal of it. The goal was basically, hey, if there's a token behind this, it could be used for the kind of the governance side. And frankly, what we were wanting to see, could we put together kind of help structure this DAO to where big companies are part of it, right? And helping move things forward. And that was really predominantly the initial piece. We started talking to a lot of Web2 companies and this whole concept of next-gen gaming. Again, not just Web3, but next-gen gaming in overall. Everybody was like, yeah, of course we're looking at that, right? Like we definitely want to figure out how to do this. And we had a lot of relationships out there. So we're like, well, why don't we all come together and we start pushing a couple common themes, right? So one, we push, what is this new tech and how do we kind of think about keeping it open and how do we kind of play off each other, right? So it could be everything from Web3 or marketplace tech. It could eventually be streaming tech. It could eventually be AI tech. I think there's an opportunity for us to come together with, 20 or 30 companies, right? To start off. And so that was kind of the initial idea. And then we were like, what would be really cool is actually if any consumer could also be involved, but it had to kind of still play out to where it didn't interfere with the companies being able to move things forward. But we wanted everybody to at least have a say, right? And that's where we kind of went down that DAO structure. So, now at this point, there's probably tens of thousands of token holders, right? We have probably hundreds of thousands at this point. Just within the Mythical ecosystem alone. So every gamer, every time you sell an NFL player, you technically own Myth now, and you could vote on the next proposal, right? So we do think that's really, really exciting. But we found a couple pillars we want to push forward. One was kind of tech. One was things like esports, right? Like content in general. How do we basically push content creators, whether it's esports influencers, whatever, into these new economies, and how do we get them aware of that, right? So that was a big one. Policy changes has been a big one. We've been very fortunate at Mythical to be involved in this. Sometimes we didn't mean to be, but we were kind of that first game with Blankos on Epic Games, on the Epic Games store. And suddenly it's like, okay, cool. Where's your ESRB rating or your PEGI rating? And suddenly we're like, oh crap. We have to go talk to them too. Cause we were used to doing that with PC console games. So we hadn't done this with a Web3 game. And frankly, when we talked to ESRB, they're like, we don't know how to rate this. Like, these blockchain elements, this Web3, we've never done this before. So we had to kind of help write policy and influence policy with ESRB and PEGI and all these other groups. Google Play and those guys, they just came out with a new NFT policy, and we were very fortunate to be, invited in to really give our feedback. Not a lot of companies get that, right? So that was part of the Mythos things too, is let's share learnings. Let's help get policy moving forward. Let's help evolve standards together. The NFT spec, we don't call it NFTs necessarily, but it is technically, we're using the NFT spec behind the scenes. It's pretty trivial. Like it's a pretty primitive system. And if we can kind of figure out what does Square need and what does Ubisoft need and what does Sega need and what do we need and can we cover 98% of it and push for that together, we think that's important. So that's really how Mythos started, is it really came together as kind of a collaboration of big companies. We've been approached by a lot of great companies. We've been approached by even some of the Goliaths now are trying to figure out how to get involved. And it's such an honor that they're thinking about that. But we do think the token is kind of interesting as well, because we're now seeing it even on our own ecosystem. You can literally sell from one game and buy into another, right? So it becomes this unit of exchange that is interoperable, right? It does allow you to kind of move between different worlds. And we think soon you'll not just be the Mythical portfolio games. It's all interchangeable within Mythical's games, but soon it'll be interchangeable. You can go from our games to another game, right? And I think that becomes a really, really important thing. And the idea that I can either hold it, and while I'm holding it, I'm part of the, governance and voting, or I can sell it and get out. And, just that concept we think is very, very powerful. And again, we've been very fortunate to have 25 other companies join with us so far, and we're getting more submissions, I think, coming in very soon. So,
and would it be correct to say that the Mythos token in a way is also an entry point into how the Mythos token becomes sort of your marketplace currency in a way? Is that?
Well, it is. I mean, we did adopt it, so we fully adopted that token. So it literally everything in the Mythos chain, or the Mythical chain, things like that, it is all recorded by the Myth token, right? So anybody using that, if you're selling an NFL player, you're selling a car in Nitro Nation that just hit early access yesterday. We'll talk about that maybe in a minute. But you can literally, it all is actually settled in this Myth token, and it's literally just a utility token that you can basically, hold, move, transfer, move between different worlds, and eventually move between different companies. So again, we're not necessarily trying to build a universal gaming currency, but we think it's a pretty awesome first step, and we're using it internally as kind of this universal token, and just unit of exchange, right, for utility within the games.
So before, I do want to talk more a bit about your own IP, like Blankos and NFL Rivals and,
Yep.
and Nitro Nation and where that is going. But before that, I have a question around that I think is kind of a continuation on the token front. Obviously, with the rise of blockchain, crypto, and NFTs, everything became financialized, right? Because you need to purchase a token, you need to purchase a digital currency that actually is the engine of what everything else you want to do. That ultimately was clearly becoming something that is not only controversial in a way, but also involving securities. But most importantly, many people just could not and do not understand what on earth is going on. What would be the simplest way to explain, in your mind, the role of the financial aspect in those future digital currencies and tokens, and why that is such an integrated part of how the economic engine around these new platforms is going to operate?
That's a great question. So I think for us, a couple things around it. One is it can be very confusing, first of all, first and foremost, right? But I do think that it becomes kind of this, like I said, we've really thought about it purely from utility, right? And in fact, like I said, we've never really, no one's ever marketed that token. There's never been an ICO for that token, right? You just kind of get it. If you sell something in a game, you get it, right? And and you can use it now. You can use it now to be part of the governance the second if you want to, or you can suddenly use it. So we think it becomes really important to just really based around utility first and foremost, right? And that concept, Jan, isn't that different than gaming, right? Virtual currencies have been around for a long, long time, right? But the idea of being able to use that virtual currency to be part of something bigger, I think is really exciting. It just gives it to us. So I guess for us, it's almost more consumer freedom is the way we view it, right? Is that I can ultimately decide, what I do with it, right? And I can invest it back in. I can kind of put it back into the game as buying something else in the game, or kind of investing my time into another project that I'm interested in. We think that's really interesting, So, but like I said, we never really considered, we never put it out to be a big investment opportunity. It really was a utility type token, right? And that was the idea behind what we were trying to push on the Mythos side. But I think, like I said, it's not a foreign concept for gamers. To end up with this symbol, right? And I have X symbols, and I can use X symbols to do Y and Z. I think it's a pretty common thing. So I don't think we've had a really hard time with gamers understanding that. And it seems to work out. Yeah.
I think the new piece of that is I would call it the more reciprocal relationship between the currency and the user. So what I mean by that is, today, if I purchase let's say the Roblox platform currency, which is called Robux, as a user, I can spend that Robux, but I can't really, and then I can resell an item or something, and I get that money back. But that is all closed inside the Roblox platform, right? There is no really way for me to interoperably spend it someplace else.
And it's really, to be super honest with you, Robux is not that different than a crypto token, right? In fact, like I said, this is one area where I do disagree kind of with the Roblox ecosystem, is that they control all of the inputs, right? They literally set the price, right?
It's a centralized bank.
It's a centralized bank, right? And that's the part that we're trying to stay away from, right? Is like, let it let the community price it, right? Let supply and demand actually price what the value of that is, right? And it's nothing that any one entity has any control over. And I think that is the really important part. And that is an area I do definitely this is an area we want to push further than what Roblox has done. I understand why Roblox does this with Robux, but at the end of the day, they are a central bank, right? They are setting a price. They're setting how fast you can withdraw. They're setting the rules of how you engage with that currency, right? And I personally believe you should, there's certain things you have to control, right? That's the right of every company, of how you interact with my marketplace, how you interact with my games. That's always the right of that company. But I think that the currency is just like, well, do what you want with it, right? Like, to me, it's actually more powerful than a centralized currency over time. And the fact that, like, right now, if I was another developer and I had a great idea to use Robux, I can't really do it unless I use it with their system, with their, and I think where we're heading as a society is that, oh, I got this, I accumulated this, I don't know what it is, it's just this utility I have, but now I want to use it for this, right? And if you can do that and build your own ecosystem, that becomes powerful. The Myth token is, it's a real decentralized token, right? It's something that you could do whatever the hell you want to with it. And I think that's really cool. Now, within our marketplace, we might have certain rules so that we can manage fraud and we can manage internal issues, things like that. But that actual utility token you receive, you can really do whatever you want. I can go take it to my MetaMask account. I can cash it out to my bank. I can put it back into a game. I can really do anything I want. It's truly about consumer freedom. And that's frankly the same concept of NFTs to me. Like, to me, NFTs are not PFP projects and all that. What got me excited about that tech in the first place was the idea that I could buy this digital 2D image of a cat, and I have buyer's remorse. I could immediately sell it. I could sell it. It's not necessarily an investment to me. It's like, I could sell it at a loss. I can sell it at a profit. I can burn it. I can give it away. I can play with it. To me, that was the big key difference, is not just a sunk entertainment asset into a centralized program. It's something I have at least some opportunities to do something else with it, right? So it shifts it now into more this buyer has more power, right? The purchaser has more power of what they want to do. It was never for me. I never bought CryptoKitties in 2017 thinking, oh, this is where I'm going to invest my money, right? That was not what it ever was. It was a consumer decision of like, well, that's pretty cool. I can buy it. And I am now, as a consumer, I have many different things I can make my own choice to do with that asset.
And I think that's a big part of what we lost in the past couple of years, right? It all became incredibly speculative, gambling in casino. And I think in the next wave, I hope that it's all going to be much more about what actually makes sense to consumer. And maybe there will be less than 1% speculative activity, but the 99% needs to be something that is meaningful and fun and interactive, that actually brings value and joy to people versus, a gambling machine.
That's right. And I think that did skew the industry quite a bit. Even the terminology of crypto drives me crazy sometimes, right? With Wind Moon and everybody's looking for a 10X tomorrow. I'm like, this is not what this is about, right? This is about being able to do something different as a consumer, as a purchaser of an asset. This is not a new investment category. This is a new functionality category of how we can interact with each other and how we can kind of create and frankly monetize those creations, right? So that's always been our focus.
Yeah, well, that's a great springboard to maybe talk about the last topic for the show today, which is, let's talk a bit about more your own IP.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear, where are you guys at with Blankos? What's next? Where are you guys at with NFL Rivals? What's next? And then Nitro Nation and what's next?
Yep. Well, I'll go through all three of those. So let me start with Blankos. I can't announce everything that's next, but there is a next coming. What's really interesting about that game is it was really our first, right? It's still on some older tech. We want to get it over to the new marketplace tech and the new chain and all that. And that's definitely something we've been kind of planning through. But for Blankos, like I said, it was a great game. It's an awesome community. It's really fun, kind of seeing that develop. We definitely made some mistakes, I think, early on, and we were learning just like everybody else. But I think for us, we ended up creating a pretty awesome IP. The challenge, I'll be super honest with you, the challenge we've had with Blankos is originally we wanted it on mobile, but back in 2018, 2019, Apple's like, like that's not happening. So we kind of went down this PC route, and PC is very expensive. Like, the game does pretty well, We have never really made money on it, to be real honest. We've never turned a profit on that game. But the challenge for us was getting to the number of users we wanted on PC, right? We hit some cost of acquisition that was just detrimental to the game. So we've been kind of retooling it a little bit. We have kind of some new plans we're working on. We got some really fun, some builds we've been working on. And the idea right now is how do we basically kind of relight that IP with being able to get it to 25, 30, 40, 50 million players, right? And again, if you set out to be like, we're building Roblox, that's not going to happen, right? You have to really think through it. If you become Roblox on your own, that's great, but you can't plan for Roblox, right? So basically, we're kind of taking a step. But one thing we're going to do, and again, the beautiful thing about blockchain is every single purchase of a character accessory would come along for the ride, right? So whatever we do with that IP, it's always part of that world, right? So that was kind of our first project. The second project again was Rivals, and Rivals is still kind of getting going as well. We launched that in May. We hit about 1 million players in the first 30 days. I think we're closing in on 2 already. And the season hasn't even started yet. So we have a big release happening in a couple weeks. It's actually kind of a big first for the industry as well. It's something we've been working very closely with Apple and Google on. So we're really excited to kind of get that out the door, to really kind of promote some more of these concepts very seamlessly, right? So that's kind of what we're working on right now. That'll be out soon. So we're very close to releasing that. Season starts September 7th. So we think we do think that game could do really well. The highlights for me on that game, Yon, is a couple things. One, it's rated very highly, as we're sitting at like a 4.7, 4.8 on app stores, which is great. That's right up there with FIFA. It's right up there with Madden. It's right up there with NBA 2K, right? So that's great. We're very proud that we were able to put out a brand new IP that's being received really well by players. They are playing the crap out of this game, which is great. I think we see it's a well over hour and a half.
The game is fun.
Hours.
I mean, it doesn't matter how financially you guys are. Like, I play the game. I recommend people because the game is just, and that I think goes back to what the core of what we do in this interactive world. At the end of the day, it's got to be goddamn fun. Otherwise, people are just not going to want to consume it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And like I said, there's a lot of new functionality coming. We're hearing people. We're working on some gameplay AI. We're talking about things like defense, all that type of stuff. We're trying to get in the game. You got to remember though, we're up against a company that's been in the market for 35 years, and so we've been doing it for a year.
And brand matters.
So there's a lot we want to add, and we'll continue to add to that franchise. And we have a long-term relationship with the NFL, so you'll definitely continue to see new stuff coming out. Very excited, but I think we can get to 10 million people in that game this year, which is pretty awesome for kind of this Web3 economy. In fact, should be the biggest probably Web3 economy game at that point. So that's been very exciting on where we're going with Rivals. Nitro Nation just actually hit early access yesterday. Still, it's definitely early access. I wouldn't call this a worldwide release quite yet. We're not marketing the game too much, but I think it's already like number 9 I saw yesterday on sports, which is kind of awesome. That game's going to be remarkable. I'd say that game has a much deeper economy than NFL does. It's the type of game that you can go deep for a long, long time. We have over 100 cars, I think, already kind of licensed and coming out. I think we'll be at 200 by the end of the year. So we're getting a lot of functionality there, and we're pushing it even further, right? The social aspects of that game, I think, are stronger. There's concepts of like these workshops that you own and you can trade and sell to other people. But now you can even partner up with, I have 4 workshops, you have 4 workshops. We can put them together into kind of this social club, or this almost like a little mini city, right? So we're very excited about the racing genre and kind of where we're going with that. But I'd say that game, like I said, it is playable right now. There are, it's definitely early access. There's a couple quirks to it, but we're working fast and furious to kind of, well, I didn't mean to pun there, but definitely fast and furious there on getting that strong for a real worldwide launch in a month or so.
John, what are you most excited about for the next 12 months?
Like I said, I'm excited about a couple things. One, I think I've kind of used this before. I think last year there was really 3 games that had these Web3 concepts that hit over 1 million players. Is kind of us and Sandbox, Blankos, Sandbox, and Axie were kind of the main 3 that hit 1 million players. And that was a big milestone, right? You start getting more attention. Other studios are starting to think about it. But you're still not quite getting the Activisions yet. They're like, that's cute, And same thing happened with Activision and mobile. I remember the days like we talked to Bobby and we'd be like, can we get into mobile? He's like, dude, it's only a $40 billion industry. We're not touching that, So it's like, that's how the big companies think. But this year, I think we'll see 3 to 4 games over 10 million players, right? And I think we have 2 of them. I think we have a shot to have 2 games over 10 million players this year. You got to remember, Nitro Nation was built on an existing IP called Nitro Nation Drag and Drift from CM Games. And it had nearly, I think it was over 80 million installs on that franchise. So we're excited to kind of be able to bring this out to tens of millions of players this year, which is exciting. So I think there's a couple games come to us. Summoner's War. I'm sorry, what's it called? Summoner's Arena now, I think it's called. It's kind of Web 2 that I know they've been already kind of very public. There's a Web 3 layer kind of hidden that they're opening up. I think that'll hit over 10 million players this year as well. So that's going to be that's literally an order of magnitude over last year, right? That's also going to drive a lot more companies to really watch the space. And I think we're a year out, maybe 2 years out from seeing a game with 50 million players. At that point, the entire industry is coming, right? So I'm very excited to see that happen because I think we're quickly moving to that mainstream adoption fast, right? And we're at a really inflection point right now. The other thing I'm excited about is obviously I'm excited about our streaming tech. We have we acquired this company called Polystream at the end of 2021. We've been doing some really, really fun stuff. I know you saw the Portals demo. We're trying to push the boundaries of what that could be in two ways. One, the cost of cloud gaming, because cloud gaming is truly revolutionary and truly opens up new functionality. The problem is it's very cost prohibitive right now, right? I think Stadia, or if you're using GPU in the cloud, you're talking $2 an hour per player, right? So if I was the Fortnite concert, right, for Travis Scott, I think they had 12.5 million concurrent viewers. If that was streamed, that would have cost Epic $25 million an hour. Like, not going to happen. But if we can get cloud gaming innovation to where it's a very reasonable cost for game developers to use, it does open up stuff like Portals. So Portals, for anybody that wants to know, is basically a demo we did with our Polystream tech, to where you can literally walk from one game directly and seamlessly into another game. We even showed it to where you're walking from Blankos, which is built on Unity, into an Unreal 4 world, completely seamless, nothing installed, nothing downloaded. That starts opening up all types of new opportunities. So that's what I'm really excited for, is what comes next and what does that do for gaming and new game models as well.
John Linden, CEO of Mythical Game, thank you so much for being. This was really great, and I cannot wait to publish the episode next week.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for having me. I'd love to be back in the future.
I'm sure we have so much more to talk about.
All right. Thanks, John.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Into the Metaverse. We hope you learned a lot and explored new aspects of the Metaverse.